who graduated from Harvard University with a BA in linguistics in 2009. After working in the video game and esports industry for 11 years, she now serves as a writer and editor for the BI, using technological metaphors to explore Vedic philosophical science.
I'm the director of the BI, and in front of the camera. Okay, so I'm glad you're all here. Other events going on. Tomorrow, we have our Leaps of Faith and Doubt. It's on the webpage, and that's at 10 a.m. by Pacharananda. It's kind of a philosophy of science with a lot of science, and he explains it in a very straightforward way. So if you don't know the science, you'll learn it in a pleasant way. And then he explains and goes into philosophical issues. We also have next, for those who are attending Krishna House morning classes, our distinguished guest from England, Akandadi, will be giving a class on Wednesday morning at Krishna House, and Sunday at New Raman Reti at the Sunday feast. And more importantly, next Saturday, beginning at 10 o'clock, right here, is a 30-hour lecture that will be done in 6 hours. And what that is Akandi has produced, it's on YouTube, an amazing series. I mean, I admit it's rare that something that goes, it's hour at time blocks. Of course, it was over 30 weeks, but something that goes on that long would keep my attention every moment. And it sit on the edge of your chair talks. And this is the condensed version. So for those of you who like Cliff Notes, you're really going to like this talk on Saturday. And what it involves is the Atma paradigm is the same topic for those of you who were at Krishna House last night for the talk. Does consciousness come from the brain? And we look at it from points of view of science, philosophy, Sankhya philosophy, from many different angles, with, again, a lot of science sprinkled through and a lot of fun sprinkled through, everything from optical illusions to odd experiments to parapsychological experiments that are done at major universities. So it's just a wealth of information in the condensed version, because everyone's in a rush nowadays. So next Saturday, you're all invited to attend in person or by Zoom. If you go to our webpage, we'll give you cards with all this on it, but Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies, so BIA.org. You go there, that was this morning, is working perfectly fine again. Okay, so thank you all very much. Christina, I'll give a little more introduction, just because I'm going to embarrass her in 3 different ways. One is not sufficient. Okay, one, Christina is very bright. I'm a Harvard graduate, linguistics and music, very accomplished. She was looking for something deeper, went to Krishna House, and then gravitated to the BI because she really has a good brain and wants to use it. So she is working with Akandadi and our Tamraparni and writing probably one of our most important books, which is tentative title, may change, The Consciousness Explorer's Handbook. What is consciousness? Who are you? It's a very, very important book. She's working on that. So now I've embarrassed her twice. May I do one more? It's her birthday today. We'll have a party later. Okay, so with sufficient embarrassment to fluster her, I turn it over to Christina. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. I want to start off by talking about where we've been in mechanistic and non-mechanistic science. So mechanistic and non-mechanistic science, which is by Richard L. Thompson, his picture is right here, who I'll be referring to as Sada Puta Das. He unfortunately left this planet in 2008, so he's not with us physically, but he left behind this incredibly original and large and extensive body of written work. So this was his first book, published in 1981, that kind of brought together all of these different ideas that he was working on. But he has books, he has articles, he has papers, and he writes about everything from consciousness to computer science and simulation hypothesis sort of things, all the way to evolutionary theory and biology, all the way to cosmology and even archaeolinguistics, like looking at ancient writings from India and trying to figure out how they relate to the Vedas and our sense of history. So this whole the Richard L. Thompson is all about going through his books and presenting them to a larger audience, because even though these books are so amazing and they are so important for our modern understanding of philosophy and kind of where Krishna consciousness fits into the world, still a lot of people don't necessarily know about them or know about these ideas. So I feel really honored to extremely inspiring book to me. So this is the 9th chapter, the last chapter, the one that kind of brings it all together. And where we've been in mechanistic and non-mechanistic science so far is that Sadhguru has gone through various large foundational ideas in modern science at the time, and that are still very relevant today, and is sort of like examining them and where the boundaries of science are and where there might be, and basically coming to the conclusion that, okay, there are these various theories in science, and scientists say that there's different kinds of evidence to back up these theories, but and there's this at least this hope that these theories kind of explain all of reality, but actually in some ways that they fall short. And if scientists have been working very hard on this, and Sadhguru would know, he has a PhD in mathematics from Cornell and really loved science. So he read all about it. He knew he knew so much of scientific history and what the cutting edge developments were. So if after doing all of this effort, all of this work, modern science hasn't really been able to solve these essential questions, then maybe we should look at something else. Maybe we should look at for another way of envisioning this problem, or any other sources of knowledge that can maybe help us solve these big problems. Okay. There we go. All right. So chapter 9 is called the Epistemology of Transcendental Consciousness. Now, I know you'll probably have heard of transcendental consciousness, right? You have like some familiarity with like, okay, transcendental and like consciousness. You've been kind of introduced to the Bhakti yoga practice. Maybe you've read some books, and so you kind of heard that. But epistemology is kind of a big and scary word. So I want to break it down for you. So epistemology is the study of how we know what we know. All right, so since this word epistemology is going to come up a few times in this presentation, and I want you all to remember this, when I say epistemology, I want you to say, how do you know? All right, epistemology. One more time, epistemology. Okay, so now you're kind of have this idea of what epistemology is. Okay, great. So this little graphic, this Venn diagram is important because it shows that epistemology deals with these 3 big things: truth, knowledge, and belief. Now, if you haven't really thought about epistemology, like how do you know things very much, you might think that these are all the same thing. That, I know something and I believe it because it's true. This is all just like this one circle. But actually, this is more like a Venn diagram, right? And if we think about it, it kind of makes sense. So there's truth out there, but there's truth that we don't necessarily believe in, maybe because we don't know about it, or maybe because we haven't come across new information that would help us believe in it. So there's truth out there, right? Like who here thinks that they know all the truth that there is to know, right? No, I mean I don't either. I'm just raising my hand for demonstration. So there's truth out there that we don't. Steve, you don't count. So there's truth out there that we don't necessarily believe in. And then who here thinks that all of their beliefs are absolutely true? No, yeah. So there's got to be something, right? Maybe we can remember back in the day when we were little. Maybe we believed something, we really thought it was true, but then it turned out it wasn't true. For example, sorry everybody, the tooth fairy is not real. You put your tooth under your pillow and you get $1 in the morning. That's actually your parents. I'm sorry if this shocked anyone, but so there are things that we believe that are not necessarily true. But then knowledge is the intersection that there is truth that we believe in. We have some kind of basis for that, and that is what we call knowledge. And so the epistemology of transcendental consciousness is going to kind of look at all of this for transcendental consciousness and also for science, and sort of compare and contrast. Okay, so up to this point in the book, so this book, Mechanistic and Non-Mechanistic Science, is for kind of a scientific audience. Either maybe they are professional scientists, or maybe they just have kind of a strong interest in science and this analytical way of looking at the world. But they haven't really heard of transcendental consciousness. Maybe if they've heard of it, they're kind of skeptical about it. So transcendental consciousness would not be part of their knowledge, the middle part of that Venn diagram. So knowledge of reality. It may be truth, but it is not yet believed. So it's not, so that's why it kind of lies outside of that little of this knowledge thing. So maybe the truth is out there, right? So it might be out there, but it's not yet in here. And so I gave the kind of the lotus bud to show that it's there's something there, but it hasn't really blossomed. So now during the course of mechanistic science, Saraputta has been talking about, like, okay, here's this scientific theory, and then here's why it might not pan out and explain everything that people think it explains. So he's during the book he's also bringing up, like, hey, there's this thing called the Bhagavad Gita. There's this ancient Vedic wisdom that might have some relevance here, and he's kind of trying to bring it together in this last chapter. But the thing is that, like, proving to someone that what they believe in is not necessarily true does not automatically make them want to believe what you say, right? If I say, like, oh, you think that the sky is green. No, the sky is not green. I can show you exactly why the sky is not green. The sky is actually blue. You're not necessarily going to be like, oh, okay, I totally believe you now, right? So there's a little bit of a gap in between in between this part where it's like, okay, well, now I've kind of read this book and I thought about how these different scientific models and theories might not have all the explanatory power that I thought they did. And Saraputta, this author, he seems smart, and he's presenting this, like, okay, there's the Bhagavad Gita, there's this idea of transcendental consciousness, but I'm not quite there yet. There's a little bit of a gap, and so we need to bridge that gap. And does anyone know what this bridge is?
Ramshaker.
Yes, this is also known as Adam's Bridge. This is the bridge from India to Sri Lanka that was created by Lord Ram and his various friends and well-wishers. So what is that gap, right? So what is that that kind of wall in between? Okay, I may be ready to let go of some of my assumptions, but I don't know if I'm ready to embrace this thing called transcendental consciousness or wisdom in the Bhagavad Gita. And so here I'm going to borrow a little bit from an excellent seminar called Faith and Knowledge by Reverend Joseph Das. William Deadweiler, PhD, and he has so this seminar, you can find it on ISKCON Desire Tree. It's really, really great. It's all about epistemology, and epistemology means how do you know? Great, I'm glad you remember. Okay, so a lot of us, maybe not everyone, but I certainly did, grew up with sort of this cultural idea that there's knowledge on one side, and knowledge involves, micropipetting in a laboratory and big fancy machines and graphs, numbers and all kinds of, labels and things like that. That is knowledge. And then on the other side of things, on the other side of kind of the human experience or ways to talk about reality, there's this thing called faith, and there's like people praying, what is that? And there's these very old books, and who knows if these are really true. And then there's stuff that people use which does not look like nice machines, and so this is faith. And so the more something looks like faith, the more it is fiction, and the more something looks like this side, the knowledge, or let's say hard science, the more that it is fact, and that there's kind of this wall in between them. And so, this is the gap that I'm talking about. The reason it's important to address this is because, well, I mean, I'm not judging here. Like, this is, if this model of knowledge and faith works for you, then that's fine. But the thing about transcendental consciousness, and specifically Bhakti Yoga, is that it takes elements from both sides, and it actually bridges this gap itself. But if you think that there is this wall in between, this great wall that like nothing can be both of these things, it has to be one or the other, then you're not going to be able to be open to Bhakti Yoga and sort of examining transcendental consciousness in an analytical way, and you're not going to be able to unlock this great potential. Okay, so in order to sort of loosen this a little bit, let's say you want to be open to Bhakti Yoga and thinking about transcendental consciousness, we have to realize that like this sort of science, knowledge, fact, religion or spirituality, faith, fiction, these things should be decoupled a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the epistemology of science. How is it that we believe the things the science tells us, and we consider that knowledge, and then we're going to come back to this side and look at spirituality, Bhakti Yoga, and transcendental consciousness. So let's say it's your first day of freshman year of college, and you're going to a science class, maybe like a chemistry class, something like that. You go up to this building, and it's this very tall, well-built building, and it's brick and stone, and you feel like, oh yes, I'm going to walk through these doors, and I'm going to learn something that's real, right? And then you go into a lecture hall like this, it's like, very large, and you sit down and with all these other students, you sit down with your like notebook or your laptop, and you're like, okay, I'm ready to learn. Everything around me is telling me that this is a place where I learn the truth about reality. And then you have, see the professor comes up to the blackboard and starts, talking about like, this chemistry professor, like, these molecules have covalent bonds, and these molecules have ionic bonds, and that sort of thing. And you're sort of sitting there in your seat as a student, and you're kind of expected to just kind of take that in and accept this as, okay, this is fact. This is how the world works. But we are now the epistemological student, and so it is legitimate and interesting for us to ask some questions. How do you know? Yeah, how do you know? Exactly. Can I see, and these are all kind of like variations on like different aspects of how do you know? Can I see for myself whether this is true? What makes this person qualified to teach me? How do I know things I can't directly experience are real? And what is this knowledge based on? So these are all very legitimate questions, right? Because if this professor is telling you, there's these things called covalent bonds, and you can't see them, you can't really feel them, you can't taste them, can't touch them, but like they're there, and and this is how they work, and this is, these are all the details about them. This is a very important part of reality, right? The way molecules connect together, very important. So now, science has, if you can go up and ask this professor, you can ask, any scientist, and they will have answers to these questions. They will be able to kind of talk you through it. And the idea is that we can also ask these questions about transcendental consciousness and Bhakti Yoga, that we should be able to, that it shouldn't just be kind of like someone telling you, oh yes, this is the way it is, and you might not be able to see it or feel it now, but just trust me, And that's all there is to it. And we should be able to ask these questions. That this is part of being intelligent and having your own mind and establishing good epistemological foundations. Okay, so going back to the book and going mechanistic and non-mechanistic and going back to kind of what Saraputa's ideas and theses here are. So he's been saying throughout mechanistic and non-mechanistic science that, hey, so the Vedic literatures have this alternative model of the fundamental nature of reality that seems to make more sense given all this data, because he's talking about all this evidence and he's talking about all this kind of logic, and here's what we see and here's kind of what happens. And so he's saying that, yes, so in the Bhagavad Gita and other literatures like the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad Purana, that conscious and personality is the fundamental basis of reality, and that this explains the data, explains things in a comprehensive and in some ways a lot better and more coherently than kind of these different theories of modern science. Now, Saraputta does say then, he says, okay, well, I cannot, give you direct proof, right in these pages, that conscious personality is the basis of reality, that there is this such thing as transcendental consciousness. And that is cause for skepticism. Yeah, if someone says something and something like, oh, conscious personality is the basis of reality and not, like randomness or something else, then someone would be right to say, well, prove it. And he says, well, I can't give you proof in the pages of this book, but that's because you need a little bit more training, you as the reader, you as the seeker, to understand the proof, to find the proof yourself. So then the question might be, well, if you're saying that this is the basis of reality and I see reality all around me, how come I need more training to understand reality? I should just be able to, you tell me, and then I should just be able to see it, right? Well, we can go back to science, right? So there are several individuals here who are pursuing PhDs, right? It's in the sciences. You are, I know, in the science as well. And so if you're asking, if you ask, chemistry or like a physics professor or something, you talk about these different scientific phenomena, these different theories, and that underlie all of reality. And how can I see this for myself? How can I prove to myself that covalent bonds are real and they really exist and they work exactly the way that you say they do? Well, you're going to have to go through a lot of training, and they're not even going to let you near the machines until like year 3 of grad school. So, and then after all of this training, after you're kind of accepted into this community of experts, then at some point you may be able to operate the special machines and then actually understand what they're telling you, right? Because they're giving you maybe these numbers or these these little points or something. You have to be able to understand what that means, and then you'll be able to say like, oh, okay, this proves to me that covalent bonds actually exist. But it takes a while. So okay, so now that we kind of answered this question of like because the same thing applies to transcendental consciousness as well, right? It is an underlying as Saraputta is saying that the Vedic literature say this is an underlying fundamental part of reality, but okay, we understand now that we need a little bit more training. It's kind of just like science. It's not just someone trying to pull the wool over our eyes. So now we have this hypothesis that there's this whole realm of God perception of the absolute, right? So God right here is kind of this catch-all term, doesn't mean a specific one religion's God and not others. It means kind of this, this supreme omnipotent consciousness, this power, this being. So there's a whole realm of God perception that we can access with transcendental consciousness. So, okay, why? So then the question might be, all right, well, you say that there's this realm of God perception. I can see God, come face to face with God, and I need this thing called transcendental consciousness in order to do it. But why? Why can't I just see God right now, right? Because part of it is this supreme divine being is everywhere and everything. So why can't I just open my eyes and see it? Well, so going back to science, we're taking a trip back to 1854 to this pretty famous book called Walden by Henry David Thoreau. And this is sort of an artist's rendition of Thoreau with his little shack out near Walden Pond. And so I thought this quote from the book was interesting. Why is it that a bucket of water soon becomes putrid, undrinkable, but frozen remains sweet forever? It's commonly said that this is the difference between the affections and the intellect. So what we can assume that this is based on is, let's say, Henry David Thoreau. He pulls a bucket of water out of the pond, and that day it's nice, and he can drink it, whatever. But then he leaves it for a few days, and it's like gross. It's got all this muck in it. Where did this muck come from? You can't drink it. Of course, Ganges River water excluded from this assumption. That's probably pretty about that. But anyway, but then maybe he also observed that, oh, when the pond is frozen and I take a block of that frozen water, I can leave it for a few days, and then whenever it melts, even if it's been days or weeks or whatever, it still tastes nice. Like, what is up with that? Who knows what this is? That is the COVID-19 virus. Yeah. So the point here is that so Henry David Thoreau did not know, or at least he didn't have access to a microscope, or maybe he hadn't learned the theory in school that told him that, hey, there are these tiny little organisms that live in the pond water, and that if you kind of leave them stagnant in a bucket for a while, then they multiply and produce toxins and waste and whatever, and that's what makes the water undrinkable. If you think about everything that we went through with or have been going through with the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Wearing masks, you're washing hands, you're keeping 6 feet away from everyone. Like, think about somebody, say a time traveler from the Middle Ages, or someone from before microscopes were invented, coming and like watching us do that. They would think we're crazy. And what are you doing? You're like, we talk about there's this thing that you can't see that is like on people's hands and in their breath, and we have to do all this stuff. It would maybe think that you're in a cult or something, like they would have no idea. But we know because of microscopes that there are things that we cannot see with our normal senses that can really affect us in our day-to-day life. So similarly, Bhakti Yoga. So Bhakti Yoga, so the kind of one of the core ideas of this idea of the Bhakti Yoga process and how it relates to transcendental consciousness is that, so the conscious entity is in an abnormal state where it thinks the only sensibility comes from the material body. And so the Sarabhuti here uses this example of, let's say, you're in front of a TV screen and you're watching like this TV show or this movie, it could also be a video game, and you're just like really, really engrossed in it. And that's, and you have like all the lights down and the shades are drawn and everything. And so that's like your world, like that's basically all that you're experiencing of reality. That becomes your reality. So even though you have all these other senses, you could get up and like walk around and eat something and like go outside, whatever. You're not doing it because you're kind of in this state where you're just enraptured by what's going on the TV screen, and that this is what is going on with our consciousness. The way Bhakti Yoga Bhakti Yoga is this process which helps rehabilitate or restore our consciousness to what it should be, which is the transcendental consciousness. So it's kind of parallel to the microscopy thing, in that the microscope extends our senses, helps us see things that are not normally visible. But it's also different in that we're not we're not extending our senses. Transcendental consciousness, Bhakti Yoga is not about like going out and exploring and finding new things, like new single-celled organisms or that kind of thing. It's about actually bringing us back to where we were, but it's still about kind of it's still about kind of making our senses more than what we think they are. And so what this made me think of is the hikikomori phenomenon, which hikikomori is a Japanese word that's kind of started out in Japan in the last few decades, but it's also now attested around the world in various places. because you have these young people, like teenagers, young adults, who decide that they just don't want to deal with personal contact anymore, like face-to-face contact. They find it too stressful. Maybe they were traumatized in some way. You know, they feel like they're not accepted by society, and so they decide to just shut themselves in and to live in their parents' house and not go into the outside world for months, years, sometimes decades. And I mean, you can still live this. You can live this way, especially now with technology, right? You can do things, try to conduct business, communicate with the world around you. But yeah, if you're really like you're really averse to social contact and that kind of risky situation, then this is something that you might do. And no judgment from me. I totally understand. People are hard. So, but the thing is that if you've been in this state, if you've been shut in like this for, let's say, 20 years, then you kind of lose your ability to hold a normal conversation with someone. So there are actually these therapists who help hikikomoris kind of relearn how to talk to people, how to maintain eye contact, how to like read people's emotions. And that this is kind of similar in that it's a restoration of of kind of this ability or this sense or this power that you think you don't have, or that you kind of left disused for so long, kind of like distracted yourself with so many other things that you feel like I can't do this anymore.
Can I just ask?
Yes.
For clarification, I'm not sure if I understood the left side. The idea is that the guy is like so absorbed in his TV that he loses awareness of reality outside of the TV screen temporarily. And are you equating that to like people that are, that they're absorbing the material body and material senses, and they're not open to other ways of.
Kind of. It's not so much about reality as it is like the person's senses, like the person's like information gathering senses and ability to interact with the world. So when you're watching a TV screen, you kind of forget that you have like arms and legs and like a sense of smell and stuff like that. When you're hikikomori, you kind of forget that you have this ability to relate to people. And similarly, with the idea with Bhakti Yoga and Transcendental Consciousness is that we're in this state where we've kind of forgotten that we have this ability to perceive God, this thing called Transcendental Consciousness. Good question. Thank you. Okay, so we've seen kind of the parallels between this idea of transcendental consciousness and Bhakti Yoga and various things in science, microscopy, etc. But Saraputta points out that Bhakti Yoga is not simply a method of obtaining knowledge, like microscopes are about obtaining knowledge. Rather, it is the means whereby each individual conscious self can attain the ultimate goal of his existence. Wow, this is a big statement, right? You don't walk into a science class and or at least I have never walked into a science class and had the science professor tell me, this is not just a way to understand more about the world, but also a way to attain the ultimate goal of your existence. That is a big claim. So, so we're going to look at what is the difference, kind of the subtle underlying difference between the Bhakti Yoga process for achieving transcendental consciousness and then modern science. Okay, so there's this attitude shift that's very important when you're considering science as a process for understanding reality versus Bhakti Yoga and transcendental consciousness as a process for understanding reality. So Saraputta's point throughout the book is that modern science has kind of gotten into this groove where scientists and people who are science-minded see nature as this passive object that can be dominated and sort of exploited because we're humans and we have this higher intellect, right? So it's like, well, humans are special. We have this brain. We can do all this stuff. We can kind of take things apart and then put them back together, figure out how they work, and we can use that to engineer the world to make it more comfortable for us in certain ways. And that there's another way of looking at things, which is that nature is the product of a greater conscious intelligence who we must cooperate with to truly understand. So here you have this very small person in the Sequoia forest of California, right, looking up and being like, wow, this is huge. And instead of seeing that as like, oh, these are trees and they're just kind of dumb and I can just kind of like cut them down and do whatever I want with them, maybe seeing that as like seeing that in the light of what Siddhartha is saying, that there's this that the fundamental basis of reality is conscious personality. Wow, maybe that there is a conscious personality that's that made all of this happen, and that is greater than me, right? So here it's like mankind, right? Human intellect, we're the top of everything, and so we're kind of looking down at everything. Here it's like, okay, there's stuff around us that might not seem to be as smart as us, but I think there still might be someone out there that has a higher intellect, higher capabilities than me, and so I'm looking up. And this change between looking down and looking up can be kind of summarized as saying like, oh, I can dominate versus I need to cooperate. And this is like changing strategies in a multiplayer game. Who knows what this game is? Yeah, okay. This is a popular game at Christina House, Settlers of Catan. So if you consider, if you're like playing a game with someone and maybe you've played the game a bunch of times and they're kind of a beginner, and so that you're like, yeah, I'm going to do all the strategies and they're not going to catch on and I'm going to win this game, versus you're playing with someone who is like, they've played this game way more than you. They're like, regional champion of Settlers of Catan. And you're like, oh man, I can't try to pull any fast ones on this person. They are going to see right through me and I'm going to get my clock cleaned. So let's put this kind of in more concrete terms. So who has heard of the prisoner's dilemma? Okay, great. So prisoner's dilemma is kind of this very simple model that's used in economics and game theory pretty often. So here's the situation, right? So you have these two prisoners and they have just kind of collaborated together. They're partners in crime. They just robbed a bank together or something. The police were able to pick them up at the scene and bring them in for questioning, and they've kind of separated the two in two different interrogation rooms, and they're trying to get each of the prisoners to rat on each other because they don't really have enough hard evidence to put them away without that testimony, because the partners in crime, they're pretty smart. They knew how to cover their tracks. Okay, so each prisoner in each interrogation room has one of two choices. They can either stay silent, which is here is cooperate, because they're cooperating with their partner in crime by staying silent, not ratting them out, or they can defect, which means they are going to rat him out and be like, yeah, that guy, totally did the crime, because the police are in there being like, hey, so I know you're totally innocent, but if you tell us what this other guy did, then we'll make sure that it's that you don't have to do any jail time, right? So there's that kind of dynamic there, a little bit of incentive. So there's pressure on both of the prisoners to defect, right? The police are like, hey, give us the dirt on the other guy. So if they manage to both stay silent, they both they cooperate together, they don't rat the other out, and they can't really communicate with each other during this situation because they're in separate interrogation rooms. So they both serve 1 year in prison, and then the police are like, all right, fine, you can go. Now, the sucker's payoff. So this is kind of like the best payoff overall. There's the least amount of jail time overall. And then the sucker payoff is if one of them betrays the other one, but the other one stays silent, right? So that's not going to be good for the one who stays silent. So the one who stays silent ends up serving 3 years, and then the one who defects, who rats the other one out, they go free. And then if they both rat each other out, they both serve 2 years. So this is actually also something that's pretty common in computer science and AI, because you have these competitions where these AIs are kind of built to play this game against each other, and then they're all kind of matched up against each other, and then kind of the winner is the one who manages to play the game most successfully and like does the least amount of jail time. So let's talk about like strategies for this sort of the prisoner's dilemma. If you just have one round, if it's just like kind of one go at it, like you either yes or no and then it's done, then probably the best strategy is going to be to rat the other out. Because if you rat the other out and they stay silent, then you go free. If you rat the other out and they rat you out, you serve 2 years, but at least it's not 3 years, whatever. But if you have what's called the iterated prisoner's dilemma, which is you have this game happening over many different iterations, right? It's like you're in this again and again and again, and you kind of have, let's say, you and the partners in crime commit multiple bank robberies, right? So so they're in this situation again and again and again. Then you have to have a kind of a different strategy for it. So it turns out that the most intelligent iterated strategy for prisoner's dilemma is called tit for tat. And so the way tit for tat works is round 1, you cooperate, so you stay silent. Round 2, you see kind of what the outcome is. Okay, did the other person, did they stay silent? Did they cooperate with me, or did they defect? Did they rat me out? If they cooperated, then you cooperate in round 2. Otherwise, if they defected, then you defect. And then you just keep repeating round 2. And this is intelligent because the other player understands, oh, okay, the other prisoner, they're seeing what I'm doing. And if I cooperate with them, they will cooperate with me. But if I rat them out, if I treat them poorly, then they're gonna rat me out. Okay, I get it. So that's why this is the most intelligent strategy. And so bringing this all the way back to the supreme being and cooperating with the supreme, looking down to looking up, and we say like, okay, there is a supreme being or a supreme or like a consciousness that is greater than me, then of course they're going to use the best strategy, right? They're going to use the most intelligent strategy. And so if you know that the other player in prisoner's dilemma is using the tit for tat strategy, then the best strategy for you is to cooperate. Because you know for a fact that as long as you're cooperating, they're going to cooperate with you. They are not going to rat you out. Yes.
You mean the other player being God?
Yeah. Pretty much. Yeah, you're playing prisoner's dilemma with God, basically. So yeah, imagine playing Settlers of Catan with God. Woo. But yeah, so that is why that's kind of the way I think about, like, oh, there is a supreme consciousness, therefore it is in my best interest to always cooperate.
So if we cooperate with God, he'll cooperate with us, and it'll be good for both.
Yeah.
It's a win-win. If we defect, try to do our own thing, he's also gonna deliver us our karma.
Right. Yeah. So there's this as we talk about and you hear about in Bhakti Yoga a lot, this reciprocation, right? That's what this is about. Okay. So now that we've kind of established that okay, let's say that there is this higher consciousness, this more intelligent consciousness in us, and we've established that okay, we want to cooperate. But now we're not in a situation where we're playing Settlers of Catan with God, or where we're prisoner's dilemma game with God, right? So we're just in this reality, kind of doing what we do. So we need some kind of structure in order to express cooperation. And how do we find that structure? How do we show God, or the supreme absolute truth, that we want to cooperate, so that the supreme truth can cooperate with us, can reciprocate with us? So Sadhuputta talks about how in the Bhakti Yoga tradition, there's kind of this two-pronged approach. There's the guru, the bona fide guru, who is a self-realized person, that is someone who has this transcendental consciousness and is able to have this direct perception themselves, and that because they are in touch with the supreme consciousness, Krishna, God, that they are able to say like, hey, here's a way that you can show that you want to cooperate with God, with the supreme truth. And then and so even if you don't have that perception yet, you don't have that consciousness yet, you can be like, oh, okay, so this is like a good method to do it. And then on the inside, you have the Lord in the heart, Chaitya Guru, which is basically a way of saying that the supreme truth, Krishna, God, is inside of all of us and knows all of our thoughts and feelings and kind of what we're thinking, what we're up to. So regardless of what happens when we try to follow the guru's instructions, whether it turns out great or turns out poorly, then we know that the supreme truth is listening in our hearts and is listening and is saying like, oh, okay, is this person trying to do this in a cooperative spirit or in, a kind of what's in it for me spirit? And that's why attitude is so important. So that attitude shift, right, of like looking up versus looking down, that's why it's so important, because in this model in Bhakti Yoga, it's about and because you have the Lord in the heart, that it's that attitude, it's that mindset, that spirit, that sincerity, that is really what matters. Okay, so at this point, if you're like a sciencey person, you're reading this book, you're like, whoa, Lord of the heart, guru telling me things to do, and I'm not really sure where it's coming from. This is kind of weird. This sounds like faith, and I kind of think that faith is like fiction. So let's get back to some more solid footing. So talking about this kind of like faith versus knowledge thing, right? People might say that like, oh, science is knowledge, whereas like faith is this other thing. Science is not based on faith. But actually, all knowledge requires a leap of faith or doubt, and this is a plug for the Leaps of Faith and Doubt seminar that happens here on Sundays. Great. But so to illustrate this, let's say that there is someone who has been blind from birth, congenitally blind, can't see anything, hasn't been able to see anything their whole life, and that they are hanging out with someone who is sighted, who can see. And the sighted person is saying like, oh yeah, so what's going on right now is there's this sunset, and a sunset is this really cool thing, and there's all this colors in the sky, and it's beautiful, and there are these clouds and everything. And so at this point, the blind person, they have no way of verifying this. So they either have to take a leap of faith and say like, okay, I think this person is describing reality. I think there is something out there, even if I can't see it, that is like this sunset is the way that he described. Or they take this leap of doubt, which is like, nah, I can't verify this, but I think this guy is lying. Like, I don't think he's trying to pull a fast one on me. I think he doesn't know what he's talking about. Of course, the third option is to be agnostic. I don't know one way or another, but that's also in the way a leap of doubt. So this blind person is sitting there. They might be, maybe the sighted person, there's another sighted person there, and they're talking to each other like, oh yeah, the sunset is so beautiful and stuff. And the blind person's kind of listening to them like, all right, I can't really see this. I can't verify this for myself. They seem to be in agreement with each other, but yeah, I don't really know. So, and in either case, right, whether the blind person takes a leap of faith, says like, okay, there might be something called a sunset there. I believe that this is a thing. Or a leap of doubt says like, no, these people are lying to me. Their knowledge state has changed at the end of this. They cannot go back to the previous state where they just hadn't heard of a sunset, which, let's say that they had, never heard of a sunset before for some reason, right? So they have, so they have gone from just like haven't heard of a sunset at all to like, okay, these people are saying that there is a sunset. I kind of believe or I don't believe, but either way, that is in the absence of like being able to personally verify, that is a jump, or that is a progression of their knowledge. Either there is a sunset or these people are liars. So when we're talking about like physics and something like astrophysics, right? Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's a really great astrophysicist. I really liked his redoing of the cosmos theories. So let's say a layman goes into, someone who's not an astrophysicist goes into Neil deGrasse Tyson's talk. Dr. Tyson says, things like, oh, the universe is expanding at this rate, right? Now, the layman is kind of in the position of the blind man. And they because they can't directly verify, at least not at that moment, that, oh, yes, the universe is expanding at that rate. But, they say like, okay, but yeah, this is physics. I believe this is true. I believe that this is knowledge. So what is the basis? What is the epistemological basis for that belief? So it might be something like, oh, well, Neil deGrasse Tyson, he has all these qualifications, he has all these degrees, he did this science himself, he knows how to analyze data from the James Webb Telescope, et cetera, et cetera. And then, oh, there's this whole community of scientists. This is a colorized photo from a physics convention in 1927. You see Albert Einstein right here. But yeah, so there's this whole community of scientists out there. They are all, they all have the degrees, and they do the science experiments, and they write the papers, and they argue amongst themselves, like, oh yeah, the universe is expanding like this, or is expanding like this, and so they can kind of, check what Neil deGrasse Tyson is saying, make sure what he's saying is correct. And then there are things like physics textbooks and and journals like Nature and things like that, where which are not like Wikipedia, right? It's not like anyone can go in and change these things. That this represents kind of the road tested knowledge that all of these experts of the past and the present have argued about and decided, like, okay, this is what we're putting in the book, this is what we're teaching in high school and college, and this is the state of knowledge in science right now. And so all of these things agree together, right? What Neil deGrasse Tyson is saying does not disagree with this and does not disagree with this, and therefore I feel like, okay, as a layman, I feel like this is knowledge, even though I can't necessarily measure the universe's rate of expansion myself. Similarly, in the Bhakti Yoga tradition, right, we have this thing called Guru, Sadhu, and Sastra. So you have, a guru, a self-realized person who might, has some kind of, not exactly maybe like a degree, but it's like, okay, this is a bona fide guru, maybe like a ISKCON approved guru or something like that. And someone who can kind of tell you directly, answer your questions directly, teach you this knowledge directly. There is a community of self-realized people, past and present, who all kind of talked about it and themselves and argued about things, and they can kind of check each other, like, oh, this person says this, and this agrees with me here, and that kind of thing agrees with, my experience. And then you have the Shastra, you have, the literature, the Vedas and the Vedic literatures, which are either, heard directly from Krishna himself or written down by self-realized souls. And so all of these things agreeing together give you an epistemological basis for taking that leap of faith. So I'm not saying that this is a one-to-one correlation with science, I'm not saying that, like, oh, the guru is exactly like, a science professor, and the sadhus are exactly like the community of science or anything. What I'm saying is that if you find this convincing when you're dealing with scientific information that you cannot personally verify, if this is your standard, then Bhakti Yoga meets or exceeds that standard. And actually, Sadhguru talks about how Bhakti Yoga has this kind of integrity and rigor that in many ways exceeds that of what we expect from modern science. So, okay, those are all well and good, looking at lots of reasons to maybe give Bhakti Yoga a chance. But these things are also all external to me, right? The guru is external, the sadhus are external, the Sastra is external, and what I'm looking for is, how do I experience this myself? You promised me direct God perception. I change my consciousness, and then I'll be able to see God myself. That's what I want to do. And and since you said that there's the Chitta Guru, the Lord in the heart, why can't I just be like, yes, I sincerely want to cooperate, and then boom, I can just see Krishna? Like, why isn't that the case? Well, there's some good reasons for that, and we can go back to science again to illustrate them. So let's say that you're a scientist and you want to do a cool science experiment. Maybe you have like a petri dish and you want to like grow some interesting bacteria or something like that. And so one of the first things you do is you're going to be like, okay, well, I need a place to do this science, right? And if you try to go into this extremely messy room and do your science, it's not really going to work out very well. You're going to be tripping over things like, where do I put my microscope? Maybe like stuff will like fall into your petri dish. It's very distracting. It's chaotic. It's not good. You really want a place like this, a laboratory which is clean and spacious. Things are orderly, and you have space to do your experiments. You have all the tools that you need, and you can really kind of focus on the science that you're doing. You might be able to do like a baking soda and vinegar volcano in there, right? But if you want to do like sustained, interesting science that really like, expands human understanding, then you're going to want an environment like this. The environment matters to the process. Similarly, what the process of bhakti yoga is about, and the reason why we can't just like say, oh, Krishna, I cooperate, and then boom, see Krishna everywhere, right? Is because the environment of that perception, the environment of our consciousness, which specifically here is the internal, the mental environment, really matters. So this, you can compare this to the messy room, right? If you're like thinking like, oh, I'm going to travel and getting the COVID vaccine and money and business and dates and things like that, that's kind of this messy, chaotic environment. And you're just not going to have space for being able to perceive and communicate with this higher intelligence, right? Just like you don't have space for the microscope if your desk is cluttered with all kinds of stuff. Because if you think about it, if you are trying to comprehend in some way something that is higher and larger and more intelligent than you, then you need all the mental resources that you can harness. You need all the space that you can make in your head to be able to accept this higher knowledge and communicate in this higher way. So you really need space. You really need this sense of like the stuff that is outside is not as important, and I am able to calm and control my senses so that I can make this space to be able to advance in this transcendental consciousness. So that's a big part of what the bhakti yoga process is about. And the chapter goes into Shravanam and Kirtanam and the Maha Mantra and various other things. So but I don't really need to go into this here. I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader. But he ends with this, and this is very significant. So he says, knowledge is indeed a byproduct of the process of bhakti yoga, but it cannot be the goal of that process. For the key to the process itself lies in the fundamental reassessment of one's innermost goals. And that kind of goes back to the looking down versus looking up, right? Because you're looking down at nature, you're trying to exploit it. That's a very different goal for you than looking up and trying to cooperate. That's something that's very deep and very subtle. So by this means, the absolute can be captured once all desire to conquer the absolute has been forsaken. And now with this, we kind of get into like this interesting, like mysterious, this is kind of one of those productive paradoxes of spirituality, right? It's like, oh, they can capture the absolute once I've forsaken, once I've left behind all desire to do so. And what this made me think of is that, like, so let's say, there's a very well-versed scientist reading mechanistic and non-mechanistic science. Maybe they've won, Nobel Prize or something. So they've kind of gone through the whole thing of, all the training and the setting up the experiments and trying to figure out how things work, and then getting knowledge and being like, okay, this increases our understanding, whatever. And, after a while, that might get kind of like repetitive. Right? You just kind of like, okay, more knowledge, kind of, make a new theory, make a new equation, kind of keep going, keep trying to refine. But this is very exciting. This is like, wow, it's not about just kind of reaching outside yourself, but it's about looking inside yourself, changing things inside yourself, and changing things inside of yourself, and then conquering the absolute truth. And like, so what I felt when I read all the way through mechanistic and non-mechanistic science is that if you are a scientist who really wants to know the truth, who really has that drive to understand what's out there, what is underlying all of reality, this should be the most exciting thing you've ever read. This should be something that makes you go, wow, there's something else out there. There's something else to reach for. There's a way, there's this bhakti yoga process. There's this way that I can get to it. And there are reasons, epistemological foundations for having faith in this process. That should be extremely exciting. So I just want to end by saying that I personally find Siddhartha extremely inspiring. I was never able to meet him while he was on the planet. But recently I was in New Vrindavan, and I had the fortune to associate with Varshana Swami, who's kind of been there and like built the place since, the beginnings of New Vrindavan. And I asked him, did you ever meet Siddhartha? Did you ever associate with him? And he got this far away, but kind of like please look in his face. And he said, oh, Siddhartha, great thing about him was that sometimes you think that someone who is that intelligent, who's that brilliant, would be arrogant. But actually, Siddhartha was just so humble and so simple. And that this is really what it means to be intelligent. When you have that true intelligence, when you really get to, when you really understand how to apply that, then ultimately you are a humble person. And that's like what Siddhartha embodied. So I would really encourage all of you to look Siddhartha up. The Richard L. Thompson Archives is this great website where you can find this stuff. We have a lot of his books here. And of course, we're going to keep doing this lecture series. We're going to start on his book, Vedic Cosmography and Astronomy, in July. So yeah, let's keep the memory of Siddhartha alive. He was just a very, very special and wonderful person. So thank you very much. All right, questions? Yes.
So going back to thank you for the amazing talk. This very caught my attention like the whole time. Going back to the prisoner's dilemma, you talked about how we know that there is more rounds, then the best strategy is to cooperate. I'm going to, if you like playing with God, playing this game with God. If someone believes that there is only one round to play, it seems like the best strategy is to defect.
Mm-hmm.
So how would you, in that case, defect would mean that it is not cooperate with God, just wants to like do his own thing. Or maybe there will be some karma, but still gets some enjoyment also. So in that case, how would you like convince them that it's best to cooperate?
Can you repeat the question for the Zoom audience? They may not be able to hear it.
Okay, sure. So the question is about prisoner's dilemma and playing, one round where it's more beneficial to defect versus like many rounds where it's more beneficial to, well, tit for tat, or if you know the other players doing tit for tat, then cooperate. And kind of translating that into the real world situation of maybe somebody who is like who is thinking that who's thinking more along the lines of like the one round, and so they're just kind of going to defect in this situation with respect to God, and kind of maybe not pay attention to him. And how would you, I guess, like convince that person that the other way is better or something like that?
To cooperate. Or you tell them it's best to cooperate and not just defect.
Yeah. So that kind of rests on the fact that like life is not a one round version of prisoner's dilemma, right? Just life is like you're always making decisions, you're constantly interacting with the environment and with other people. And so if you think of like every kind of moment of your life as an iteration of prisoner's dilemma, then that makes a lot more sense than just thinking of it as like one thing. I mean, I guess, if you have this idea that, I just have this one life to live and then there's nothing else, then sure, you could defect. But in that case, you don't think there's another player anyway, right? And if you think that like, I just have one life to live and then afterwards there's heaven or hell, then you probably want to cooperate. So yeah, so I would say just to point out that like life is not a one round thing, that life, unlike in a game where there's just like, one moment where you say yes or no, and then, maybe you're done, that life and reality are always about just like continuing and changing and still doing things.
Yeah, like just like what I understand, I really like that comment. But even if it's just like one life, still defecting is not. It's not as enjoyable. There's still like a lot of like trouble and miseries in the same life. So it might make someone to think that maybe it's best to cooperate, even if this is just one lifetime. That would be more enjoyable, like more peaceful.
Yeah. It also depends a lot on like the culture you grew up with and the ideas that you have about kind of what it, does God want to be feared or does God want to be loved? That's part of like what this gets to, because a lot of people, or there are people in certain traditions who think that, God wants me to fear them, And I think it's more, and it's much more consistent with Bhakti Yoga and the Vedic philosophy, and I think with reality, to think of it as like cooperation versus defecting, as opposed to like, oh, I need to fear this person. Yeah. Prabhu?
Thank you. This was an excellent talk, and it somehow reminded me of C.S. Lewis's logic in Mere Christianity. He kind of builds the logic of Christianity up and then presents the theology. I think you're doing something very similar with Gaudiya theology. My question is transcendental consciousness itself. Is this a translation of the word samadhi? Because if it is, in the Bhagavata, samadhi is the method of seeing transcendental reality, except you can see Krishna face to face. Here we are talking, giving examples of looking up for it, and being open to the possibility of transcendental consciousness, which is still at the Brahman level, if you think about it. So, do you think there are variations to transcendental consciousness? How would you account for the nuances in how transcendental consciousness helps us perceive realities that's beyond the purview of the senses?
Yeah, okay, so summarize that question. The second question is about the use of the term transcendental consciousness and sort of what and that it if we use it as kind of this just blanket term, that you miss a lot, you potentially miss some of the nuances of like the different levels maybe you can attain in understanding that there is a supreme absolute truth, but then eventually getting to the point where you see the Krishna or the supreme truth face to face. Is that about what you mean?
Yeah, close. I'm talking, if you go to the, kind of go to the epistemological texts, right? It appears to me that transcendental consciousness is a catch-all term, much like God in the English language. And so, if I were to be more specific about my question, do you think that transcendental consciousness encapsulates the variety of experiences that you come across in Shastra, right? Or, where does transcendental consciousness begin? Where does it end? Is it samadhi?
Okay. So consciousness that we read about in Shastra, and is it equivalent to samadhi?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I feel like I'm not very qualified to answer that question. I will say that for the audience that Sadhaputta is trying to address with this book, that it is kind of a larger term that he doesn't go into such fine detail on. I mean, he does talk about how for example, natural theology, or let's say, intelligent design hypothesis, and how just saying that like, oh, look at how complex and wonderful this plant is, therefore there must be a God, doesn't really tell you much about the nature of that God, right? So there are these stages, and then he talks about, well, there's Krishna, that these texts talk about this person with very particular forms and characteristics. So I think that transcendental consciousness to this audience does kind of cover all of these ideas, and that it's sort of like, here's this book in a way is kind of trying to get a scientific person to just try it out, just come, just see what this is all about, just take that initial leap of faith, and then there's so much to learn. So yeah, I would say that I would say it's more than just samadhi, because advanced level of this of transcendental consciousness, and he's talking about like, okay, maybe I haven't awakened that consciousness yet, but I am taking a step on the path. And so even though I'm when I'm eating prasadam, like it might seem like I'm eating or process. Yes.
I mean, this is continuing on the same thought. There was a slide that you showed early on that said that one can see God through transcendental consciousness.
Yes.
So, yeah. this is the hypothesis, that there's a whole realm of opposite that we can access with transcendental consciousness. When I read that, I was thinking that he was presenting transcendental consciousness as a process by which one can perceive God. So in that case, because it's a process, and then naturally it entails stages. The process of developing spiritual consciousness will bring one through stages of higher and higher realization, which Bhakti Yoga does. And yeah, just from the starting point, like transcendental, the word literally means to transcend, to go beyond matter. So he's trying to get people to see that, there's something beyond matter.
Yeah.
And by engaging in a process, we can go beyond matter, and we can actually see the whole realm of God perception.
Yeah, so I would say that is correct. My only tweak of that is that he's kind of presenting transcendental consciousness as the sensibility to see God. And then Bhakti Yoga is like the process to develop that transcendental
So
consciousness.
transcendental is like it's more of a perceptive.
Yeah, so like the microscope or that kind of thing. Yeah, but but instead of extending our senses, with like technology or something outside of ourselves, it's bringing us back to what our normal, innate sensibility.
Yes, I mean, he keeps keeping it vague here because he's talking to material scientists, so it's just about, like, there's a lot more than what you can see through your microscope. There's a higher level of perception. Yeah.
Do you have any questions from Zoom?
Just have some comments from people.
Oh, okay.
They love it.
Okay.
One question.
Yes.
So we have Bhakti Yoga, and we have set of practices that are there in Bhakti Yoga that everyone is following. Then why we are not reaching the transcendental consciousness at a scale that we are expecting?
Yeah, so I think at the scale that we are expecting is the key part of that, right? So, if you go back to like this thing, right? You might think that like, oh, I just have to clean up my room and install some equipment, and then I get this, and then I can, see the cool scientific results or whatever, right? But the mind is much more subtle. So Prasada Buddha goes into this more in the book than I've really been able to do. But it's sort of like, well, what if you're like cleaning your room, but then, you keep putting stuff in it because that's your habit. And then all of a sudden it's all cluttered again. You can't do your scientific experiment. So the process, it involves discipline and involves, and involves kind of a lot of sustained work that he says, like, that we, especially, in the West, might not be used to doing or used to kind of envisioning. Like, what does it take to go from here to here, and not just as like one instantaneous state, but like continuously. Because if you're, if you're a scientist, right, you can't just like, one day and then, oh, it's done, and you get all the results. You have to keep your room clean and orderly and have everything else.
I mean, most of us here from Mission House, so it reminded me of the ashram experience and why it's so crucial for spiritual advancement is because, you put aside your romantic relationship pursuits, you put aside your business ventures, you just put aside all those things that clutter up your room so that you can have a clean mind, so you can do your science experiments and actually get good results.
Yeah, Jai Krishna House. Okay. Well, all right. I think that's being a wonderful audience.
Thank you so much, Christina. That was a wonderful presentation. I just wanted to put in a plug to join us again in 3 weeks on Saturday, July 1st. We're going to have the inaugural event introducing Richard L. Thompson's second book, Vedic Cosmography and Astronomy, which was published in 1989. We'll have a special guest speaker, Hridayananda Das Goswami, Howard Resnick, who received his PhD in Sanskrit and Indian Studies in 1996 from Harvard University and recently published his dissertation in the prestigious Harvard Oriental series. He'll speak about the significance of Vedic cosmography and astronomy for a modern audience. And then Prishni Sutton, the secretary of the BI and the Richard L. Thompson Archives, will give a presentation on the introduction of this pioneering work on Vedic cosmology. So please join us for that as well.
It's gonna be in here in person.
I believe, yes, there's gonna be in person, and there will be. on-
Everything we do will be hybrid.
But I mean, Rita and Rush will be here in person.
No. It'll be by Zoom. Yeah, I expect him back maybe in September. Looks like that. We have to finish construction first. We like to hammer some nails. Okay, so, where's Prishni? We are gonna have a little prasadam shortly. So let us, any questions anybody have on future programs, what we're doing, what's going on? Or, yes,
Is there a same kind of program like this next Saturday?
Next Saturday. We need Prishni desperately.
Didn't, someone announce that Country Club is doing something next?
Oh, yeah.
No, are you giving next Saturday here?
Yes.
That's what we heard from you, but no, Saturday here. for the-
I did. Oh, all day Saturday, the Atma Paradigm. I'm sorry, I got mixed up. No, I got mixed up. All day Saturday, the Atma Paradigm. Sorry, thanks. I got mixed up. We'll begin at 10 a.m. Break. It might seem like a feel that way. It's very fast moving and intellectually stimulating. So you are all invited here. Again, you can register online. We'd like to know who's coming. So go to our website events and register. So we can plan for prasadam and all. And you can attend Zoom. Unfortunately, I have to be out of town, but I will be here all day by Zoom. I just can't physically be here that day. Any questions, comments? Thanks, Prabhupada Priya. I did get mixed up. Okay, with that, we'll break now and soon there'll be some prasadam, rumor has it. But we're missing one Prishni, so I think she's next door getting the prasadam. Okay, thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Yes.
Well done, Christina.
That was great.
Really good model role. Thank you so much. It's cool. I think now that's, but yeah, but yeah, I mean, well, you video games get understanding in there, yeah.